Connecting to go live. Good evening, good evening. Good evening, Cannabis Equity Minutes with Cynthia Monpoint on this beautiful, beautiful evening of May 29th, 2024. And this evening, we're going to talk about accountability and the community, right? So a lot of the times, the information that I've come and shared about talks about data when we're looking at the involvement of various business owners and what the community and what the industry is doing to support the community. So both combined. But tonight, the conversation is going to look a little bit more on a question I want to ask about accountability. And what role do we play when it comes to holding those in power, those in positions of power, those decision makers accountable for what's happening? Specifically, I want to talk about a vicious, violent act that's happened within the community of Boston, and no one's talking about it. You know, we can go back and first I just want to highlight the fact that this is not something that isn't talked about, because constantly we are hearing on the news about various perpetrators of violent acts of rape. This is what this is about this evening, about rape. So late night conversation here. Really serious talk about how do we hold our community accountable, and why aren't we hearing more about the violent, vicious rape of an 11-year-old child. Not a young woman, not a young person, a child. We recently heard in the news about Corey Alvarez, 25 or 26-year-old Haitian in Boston, found at a Comfort Inn, arrested for raping a 15-year-old girl. Unacceptable. And that was, the public was made aware of this. However, on April 18th and 19th, we know an 11-year-old girl, a child, 11 years old, was violently and viciously assaulted by 3 grown men. And one of those men happens to be a very public figure, David Jean-Jacques. We don't hear that name. No one has talked about that. And in fact, I wonder if it wasn't mentioned here on this platform, if it wasn't mentioned in relation to another incident that David Jean-Jacques is involved in, would the community even know? And the public has a right to know this. And there are questions that we should be asking of our leaders, of our decision makers, of our policy makers, of our police officers, as to why it is that we have not heard about this. Why is it that the only place we're hearing about this is on a social media stream? Why has it not been brought to the forefront when this is something that is egregious? And anyone with a child, I have children, anyone with a child, anyone who cares about children, anyone who cares for children wants to know if someone who we've looked at as a public figure, someone who is presented in the eyes of the public as a champion for equity, a champion for the community, receiving state funds, receiving city funds to support their work, and to know that they are engaged in activity that is on video camera. So this is not something that we're trying to figure out. There is video footage of David Jean-Jacques entering a hotel with an 11-year-old child. As a married woman, if I'm entering a hotel with a man, that's already questionable. What is a grown man? We're talking 31, 32, 33 years old, whatever the age is. They're over 30-year-old man doing in a hotel room with an 11-year-old child. And this child, unfortunately, was in the custody of the state at the time. So you have to ask yourself, how did he even get access to this child to bring her to a hotel and coordinate with 2 other men and viciously, violently violate this child? And nothing. Crickets. Now, if you Google David Jean-Jacques, the Big Hope Project. He's a co-founder of the Big Hope Project, listed on their paperwork as the treasurer and co-founder, still actively listed there. So if anyone is telling you otherwise, that is not what is that is what the case is right now with Massachusetts Corporation Division. Why isn't anyone talking about this? This is a state-funded nonprofit. And I have to ask this question about accountability. And folks may say, oh, well, you want to be quiet. Well, listen, I'll be quiet when I know this 11-year-old child is getting justice. And right now, that's not happening. Why is that not happening? The state's already tried to undercharge him. We're talking about a violent, vicious rape of a child. This child, in Massachusetts, there's a threshold for the age of 14. This child is under the age of 14. So that means there is no consent in any capacity. An 11-year-old cannot provide sexual consent in any capacity, not dealing with a grown man. We also saw the same thing with the Nican assault that David Jean-Jacques is also involved in. He wasn't charged for being involved in that assault. In fact, the police provided a report and listed him as victims, but anyone with two eyes and a level of critical thinking watching a video, you don't even have to have a level of critical thinking actually. Just watching the video can see exactly what happened, where you have these men follow another man into a building, call his name, you see him turn around, you don't need audio, and then they assault him, assault the woman that's with him. There's further footage that is available that details where the people who work at the Heinz talk about the Big Hope Project founders being a nuisance all weekend, yelling and assaulting other patrons at the Heinz Convention Center, and yet no charges? No charges, Boston? How is that? And so when I look back at the details involving this 11-year-old child, and I wonder, well, perhaps if they were held accountable in March of 2023, David wouldn't have been in a position in April of 2023 to viciously violate an 11-year-old child. We're talking about, this is a man with a social worker's degree. This is a man who has come into the professional community space and has presented to the city of Boston and to the state of Massachusetts as a champion for the community. As a champion for the community. As a champion for the community, and this is what you do with your hands? You violate an 11-year-old child? How is that acceptable? And when are we going to make sure that this does not happen? This does not continue to happen. And one thing I'd like to highlight, I probably touch upon it a little bit more, but this actually is being investigated in the Child Trafficking Division of Suffolk County. So this isn't just an incident. There's no way to talk about sexually violating an 11-year-old child with three men, bringing her to a hotel. And this is what the state has shared thus far. A lot of this information is, some of it is publicly available, some of it is knowledge that folks who are involved in this are well aware of. And while all of the details aren't out there, there's enough information for the community to be asking questions, to hold them accountable. And the other piece I really want to highlight is the fact that the Cannabis Control Commission is probably one of the strongest advocates for the Big Hope Project. They have been the one to facilitate and allow for businesses to meet state mandated requirements for their positive impact plans by saying that they are funding the Big Hope Project that is led by David Jean-Jacques and his brother Harry Jean-Jacques. And so that means these cannabis businesses in Massachusetts are generating funds that they're supposed to be given a portion to positively impact the community. And they are positively supporting a pedophile. They are positively supporting a man who would take an 11-year-old child and bring her to a hotel room and violate her. That's where this money is going to. And so when the city of Boston Mayor Wu issues a check for $50,000 to the Big Hope Project under the guise of champions for the community, supporting re-entry, I don't understand how these people can be leaders and considered champions of positively impacting the community when they are violating our most precious, our most vulnerable, our most innocent members of our community. And no one is saying anything about that. And what do I mean by no one is saying anything about that? This happened in 2023. The charges were brought forth officially against David Jean-Jacques in February of 2024 or 2024. I believe February he was arrested. March, I believe, is when the arraignment happened. And yet the Cannabis Control Commission is still allowing for positive impact plans to move forward with the Big Hope Project listed as recipients. So what does that tell you? And the other piece I want to highlight is the parties involved. The parties involved in everything from the arrest to the arraignment. We're talking Boston City Police, as I shared before, when they were actively and aggressively assaulting folks at the NECAN event at the Heinz Center last year. The Boston Police didn't include them, didn't identify them, did not list them as attackers. In fact, the detective involved went on to say that they were the victims based on their testimony alone and that of Grant Smith Ellis, who is another person who has his own issues he's facing right now, a restraining order for assaulting a woman. And yet I have to ask myself, when is the community going to hold these people accountable? The same people that the community was championing as advocates for disproportionately harmed communities, advocates for the city of Boston, advocates for those who have been harmed the most by the war on drugs. And yet here you are, David Jean-Jacques, perpetuating harms against the most vulnerable in our community. And then we see that not only were you undercharged, in most instances like this, when you look at how the courts operate, bail isn't even issued. Bail is not issued for a serious violent offense that involves murder or rape. And here we have rape of a child by a grown man. Actually, there were 3 grown men involved. And yet you were able to get bail. Again, I want to highlight, folks should also be paying attention to New England Law School. Why do I bring up New England Law School? Well, the judge involved in this case, graduate of New England Law School, also happens to have graduated at the same time as Wendy Murphy. At the same time she graduated New England Law School. He also graduated Boston College. Same college Wendy Murphy graduated. And you might ask yourself, well, why am I bringing up Wendy Murphy? Well, Wendy Murphy is the mother of Grant Smith Ellis, who also attends New England Law School. Now, I said to you all, I want you to pay attention to New England Law School. I'm going to see if I can do this quickly, make the connection. I've already identified the judge that was involved in with the arraignment here in Suffolk County for this case, and how he's been undercharged. He was allowed to show up to court via Zoom. It's not COVID. He wasn't required to show up to court physically. You're allowed to be at home, and you just have a curfew from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Are we sure that this child is protected? This child was in the custody of the state, and yet we have the state-funded nonprofit violating this child? Are we going to hold the state accountable to making sure that this child gets justice, that this child gets the protections that she needs, the services that she needs for the trauma she's experienced? Back to New England Law School. So New England Law School has also partnered with the Big Hope Project. Look in their records. Grant Ellis Smith is also a longtime friend and business partner for the Big Hope Project. When you see the Big Hope Project involved in various public speaking engagements, Grant has expressed his connections in facilitating that. WGBH has had the Big Hope Project on their show several times, and yet not one mention of this incident involving this child. Where's the accountability? Back to New England Law School. So we talked about New England Law School has partnered and financed the Big Hope Project. They're a partner of the Big Hope Project. We talked about the connections with Grant Ellis Smith, his mother, the judge. Everyone involved is a graduate of New England Law School. David's attorney, his defense attorney, New England Law School graduate. The clerk magistrate, New England Law School graduate. Now, New England Law School is not that big a school. Suffolk Law School is much larger. They graduate double the amount, and yet they have 27%, maybe 30% of their graduates sit 30% of those who sit on the bench in Massachusetts are graduates of Suffolk County. And yet, have you heard me name anyone from Suffolk County involved in this court case at all? I just want accountability. I want to bring this information to the community so that you can hold our leaders accountable. You can hold businesses accountable. You should not be, unless you support violating children in this way, money should not be directed towards any entity that is founded, led, and controlled by a person who is on video. Text messages between 3 grown men. He is involved in text message communication about the activities that they want to do, that they are doing with an 11-year-old girl. Folks need to contact the Cannabis Control Commission and hold them accountable, because this stems back to this mode of operation with the Cannabis Control Commission in terms of allowing and pushing for businesses to support the Big Hope Project. Stems back to MRCC, and when the Cannabis Control Commission was pushing for that nonprofit state-funded agency group, and when we called out the inappropriateness of that relationship, when we called out the fraudulent nature of that structure, they had to disband that relationship, and now they erected another one led by violent thugs. I don't understand. So another piece of detail, and for me to say this, is understand that these leaders of the Big Hope Project were not able to pursue business opportunities in the cannabis industry as owners because of their record. That's how egregious their record was, that they could not participate in the social equity program in that way. And so instead, they attacked social equity program participants, those pursuing business licenses, who would not acquiesce to their leadership. And again, I talk about accountability because perhaps if some of these business owners, instead of and I get it, you're about the business of trying to operate and erect this a business in this industry. That's what your focus is. You're not really trying to get lost in the melee of politics. However, you have to be cognizant when you have money that's going towards a nonprofit and the purpose of that is to support the community, and then you find out that those leading that nonprofit are nefariously fraudulent. You have a responsibility to your business. You have a responsibility to the community to make sure that your money is not funding these actions. I've just gone over several assaults. I've gone over bullying, I've gone over intimidation, and I've gone over a vicious, violent attack of an 11-year-old. At what point do you get over the cognitive dissonance and start to think critically and say, perhaps we should not be supporting this nonprofit in this way? Perhaps we should not allow the Cannabis Control Commission or any entity, Mayor Wu, any of our elected officials, to prop this organization in front of the community as if this organization is serving the community when they in fact are doing the exact opposite. They've gone so far as to file false charges with respect to that NECAN incident. They filed false charges in an attempt to get a man arrested. But I thought you were about the business of protecting those harmed by the war on drugs. This is a social equity business owner that you have filed these false charges on. And again, no accountability. Perhaps when we decide to step in and hold people accountable for their actions, they won't continue to perpetuate more egregious actions. Now we've gotten to the point of 11-year-old. At what point does the community raise their hand and say, okay, this is enough. We will not accept this. We will not stand for this in any way, shape, or form. So I say all that, and I've given you some things to keep in mind, some folks to hold accountable. There's some other people you can contact. The ADA who's on this case is Ashley Poland. Give her the heads up. You know, she's not part of New England law. And granted, a lot of the attorneys that are in Massachusetts that are listening to this message, that are aware of other cases that are involved tangentially or not, hold your peers accountable to their professional standard of ethics, their code of ethics, their responsibility to this child, to the Commonwealth. Hold them accountable. You know better than the public at large. I want to highlight one attorney in particular. Many folks know Blake Mensing, and if you look at all of Blake Mensing's business projects that he is spearheading full force, Big Hope Project is listed as the recipients of their positive impact plan. Now, some folks, again, like I say, the cognitive dissonance is so deep when it comes to understanding and looking at this with common sense that it perhaps will require. This is something that has been deeply disturbing me to think that, will this child get justice? Or are businesses going to continue to fund not only his defense, fund the Big Hope Project? And if they do so and they continue to do so and they're allowed to get away with this, what will happen next? So you have your call to action, right? Get in contact with the attorneys that are involved in this case. It's coming out of Suffolk County Criminal Court. Next court date is June 17th. Trial is already scheduled to happen in March of 25th, but they put that on the docket, but anything can happen, especially if this goes under the radar and no one is calling, no one is checking in, no one is asking questions, holding the system accountable to making sure that the 11-year-old girl, 11 years old, we're talking middle school, 5th grade, end of elementary, entering into middle school, entering into 6th grade, 5th, 6th grade, 11-year-old girl. Most people know an 11-year-old girl. You can see how innocent an 11-year-old child is, even if they've experienced a lot in their life. You can see their level of immaturity, the level of not knowing what the world holds, despite what they may have gone through. As I shared, my understanding is that she is she was and continues to be in the custody of the state. So you can imagine the level of trauma that this child has likely been exposed to already. Another organization to check in with is an organization called SEEN, which is the support the ending of exploitation now, which it's a children advocacy group out of Suffolk County District Court. I believe her name is, what's her name now? Sheila Gobar is the program manager there. She is over the Division for Human Trafficking. You can contact her and ask her, make sure that she is aware of this case, make sure that she is aware of this child, and that she knows that this child is receiving the services that she needs. And part of the role of this agency is to enforce offender accountability by prosecuting adults who exploit youth, who violate youth. Get in contact. This is the SEEN Children's Advocacy Center out of Suffolk County. Contact them, making sure that they're holding up their responsibility to this child. And if you have any other questions, there is a lot of information that we have on various platforms where you're seeing this video. You can ask some questions. I'm happy to weigh in, and hopefully that was clear enough to get some folks thinking. I know there's a lot of it is documentation, so perhaps listening and hearing this the details as to what is happening right now in the city of Boston. No one is talking about it. You don't hear any media, any press around it. There are some other there, and it's not to say that other cases, other news stories are more worthy than this here. We have a state nonprofit getting their hands on a child in custody of the state and questioning whether or not the state will do right by this child, will uphold its responsibility to its child and to the Commonwealth with respect to the laws that are already in place. And with that, I'll close for the evening. It's been a second since I used this device. Y'all get me for an extra couple more seconds as I figure out how to close out. This. Thank you for joining live. Excuse me. Stop broadcasting.